Hey, what's up everybody? Saber here, back with a new discussion video. Now this is a bit of old news at this point, but I still wanted to sit down and talk about it. So pretty much, Saber Interactive's Chief Creative Officer, Tim Willitst, I hope I said his last name right, was in an IGN interview a while back, and there he talked about why he thought all of these big budget AAA games have been failing lately and the current state of the industry itself. And I was wanting to talk about this because a lot of what he said mirrors a lot of what I've said about the current state of the game industry and mirrors a lot of my frustrations with it. So let's talk about it. In his interview with IGN, Tim said that AAA developers are tending to overscope their games, which in turn means they fail to do any one thing brilliantly. And this is one of the things I've been saying about a lot of AAA games over the years. The sheer size and scope of these games are ridiculous at this point. Like, does every single game need to be this massive open world with hundreds of side quests and a ton of different mechanics and game systems that need to be like 80 to 100 hours long? Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any open world games, period. I'm just saying, does the bulk of AAA games need to be exactly like that in order to be considered good? Tim Willitst even said in an interview that great games will always do well, and Space Marine 2 isn't a massive open world game with a ton of side quests, but that game still sold really well for them. So I agree, if a game is good, then it will do well. Not every game has to follow the same or specific formula or style to be considered a good game. And as I have also been saying before, if they tone down the scale and scope of these games, then maybe they wouldn't take as long to develop as they do now, and the cost to make these games wouldn't be as high as they are now as well. He then goes on to say, "We have a core belief that what you do every second and what happens when you push these buttons and that core gameplay loop is so critical. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction and the gameplay and the feeling you have." I like that he said this, and I like that philosophy they have when it comes to game creation, because if they stick really well to that, then that means everything you do in the game has a purpose and a reason behind it. So you're not just running around doing aimless or pointless filler content for the sake of padding out the game. You know, every interaction in the game has a reason behind it, and I'd love to see more of that in AAA games, because I'm getting real fatigued by the filler busy work content in some of these games. Then he says, a lot of teams throughout development will overscope games. They look at some other game that just came out and say, oh, we got to do that, let's add this, we got to do this, and they can lose focus on the core, what actually makes the game fun. I agree with this too. A lot of games will just add a popular mechanic from another popular game because that game did it and it became popular. Now, this isn't necessarily a new thing, you know. Games have done this before in the past, but I do wish developers didn't feel pressured into adding certain things into a game because another game did it and made it popular. Or, well, maybe it's not necessarily the developers, it's probably the higher-ups. I wish the higher-ups at these companies didn't feel like, oh, well, this game did that, so let's do it too. It's not going to always work. You know, every type of popular mechanic in one game isn't going to, you know, retroactively work in every other game. Now, if it fits with the style and or the mechanics of the game being made, then yeah, sure, add it in. But I just don't like the idea that a certain mechanic needs to be shoehorned into a game just because something else did it and happened to become popular. He then went on to talk about development costs. He says, we don't need to sell 4 million units to make it being Space Marine 2, a success. There are many games, sadly, especially out of North American developers, where if you do not sell 5 million copies, you are a failure. I mean, what business are we in where you fail if you sell less than 5 million? You know, I'm so glad he said this, because this is one of the craziest things about all of this when you think about it. I just don't understand the logic of making something that's so expensive that it would practically take a miracle for it to be profitable, let alone even just break even sometimes. Like, I remember back in the PS2 days that a game that would sell 1 or 2 million copies was considered a hit success. And now, like Mr. Wilson said, if a game does sell less than 5 million copies, then that game is considered a failure. The current business model for gaming right now really is not sustainable. And this is why we barely see any of these major companies taking risk anymore, or coming out with a lot of new IP, because it costs so much and takes so long just to make a single game. I mean, take a look at this. I just found this while I was writing this video when I looked up what was considered good sales for games back in the 2000s while I was writing this video. And yeah, it comes from an AI generated summary, so I'm hoping it's accurate. But look at these games and the sales numbers they have here. Those top 3 games, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, Gran Turismo 2, and Zelda Majora's Mask, all had sales somewhere in the 1 millions mark. Now, if those games came out today with those numbers, they'd all be considered failures, or at least quote-unquote decent sales by today's standards. Like, it's insane. Also, just a quick addition that I wanted to add. I think we need to rework the boundaries of what is considered a success in the gaming industry. Like, just because a game sells less than 5 million doesn't mean the game is necessarily a failure. As long as the game sold enough copies to maintain the company, keep them afloat, and have a sizable enough audience for the to support the game and stuff, I don't think that's necessarily a failure. Considering just how many games come out these days and how many just go way under the radar with fighting for visibility. There's so many games come out, it's like information overload. It's hard to keep track of literally everything. So with games just vying for competition of just being seen, a game selling 1 million copies, and that still sounds like a pretty good success to me. But overall, I'm really glad this guy came out and said all of this. This stuff that he said in this interview is pretty much a lot of what I've been saying myself for a few years now about the trouble with modern day AAA game development. So it's nice to see someone with some clout in the industry come out and echo my similar sentiments. But that's the end of this video. Tell me what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you guys agree with him, what he says in the interview? Do you disagree with him? And what are your thoughts on how the current era of AAA game development is at this particular moment? Please don't forget to leave a like on the video and hit the subscribe button. I'm StemMac35 and I'm out. Peace.